Okay. This video is me responding to the I guess the general chat rooms that I've been in G plus, the supposed great debate community, which really isn't a great debate community. I don't believe there is a great debate. Not really, unless the debate is whether or not one has. I mean, I guess the great debate is defined between the people that believe in a god or gods and those who don't, and that's simply the debate. It seems as if there's a limit of consideration, deliberation, a limit of access. Maybe aspect recognition is at bay in certain respects, or it's convolutedly given over towards a god or goddesses in other aspects, other relationships. I'm doing my best to freeform without sounding like word salad, and by that I mean I have to make certain that I'm using a kind of the basic genre of classical inherited rational discourse in order to get to the points that I'm trying to get to. When some of the points that I'd like to get to are they themselves are about getting to a point of irrationality, expanding oneself into irrational realms, if you will, of consideration and dialogue. Um, Somebody brought up, there's a recent video that a guy named MK posted with Ozzy and Floyd in a room where they were discussing kind of a reaction to Darwin's deity, evolution false, with the idea of, I think, evolution false. What's his phrase? A self authenticating, that God is self-authenticating. Right now, the rational philosophical pushback on this with Floyd and Ozzy having been a theist, now an atheist, kind of wants to delimit what it is can be spoken of in terms of justifying one's coming to the realm of and the limits of rationality. Um, as I would say, and well, I'm not going to get into internal critiques yet. Let me just go ahead and jump in this way. Basically, Ozzy and Floyd are saying that, and this makes a lot of sense. That at some point your memory, your body, your experience, you presuppose it, but you do not justify. If you justify these as presuppositions from which to speak rationally, speak logically, right? Then you don't justify those positions. Otherwise, you're speaking in a logical circularity. So the point is to go mute at the point of recognizing that your presuppositions are based on certain physiological facts or happenings such as memory, experience, sensation, um, and then the ability to maneuver symbols in one's head to make difference similar, to formulate identities, good starting points, right? But as soon as one attempts to justify, and this is where I have a problem with Ozzy and Floyd, and I would like to get into it with them, or anyone else for that matter. But it's this idea that one does not speak meaning these guys do not even attempt to speak or justify the circularity, right? Now, I think Spoken had brought up the circularity, and other people have brought up, like, even if you are circular at this point, in attempting to justify a presupposition and mirror it, align it with a theos, uh, align their theos with evolution in terms of what external are they referencing, where the theist here references God as a Christian God as singular source of that kind of outbounded, non-justifiable uh, uh, being, where the theist is going to say, well, no, this is my physiology as a result of these historic fact trends of evolution that lead to our organism being able to speak of what our limits are, our capabilities are, right? But we don't want to speak of those, right? So my critique of the secularists, the atheists, if you will, at this point is that the very I've often, I historically have brought up the difference that I think a priori knowledge is a subset of a posteriori knowledge. And I mean to allude to that as it relates to prelingual humans moving into linguistics, but but uh, but I also mean it relative to one's physiological ability or spiritual, if you will, ability to apprehend, to have mind, to have consciousness, right? The fact that my node, my organism, my being is able to apprehend these logical structures, such that um, instead of just speaking of a prelingual being moving as an infant moving into linguistics and linguistic processing, but to speak of what it means to awake as an adult and re-engage and sense my consciousness, sense language, sense grammar, sense everything. and then to talk about what it is to step back to this, if you will, irrational, prelingual, not supposed to be justifiable state, and speak about what it means for the secularist to say something like, I'm going to go mute as soon as you ask for justification because I don't want to be under threat of sounding circular, right? As they attack Darwin's deity for his circular approach, right? And the thing is that the secularist, um, I think it's okay. I think at this point it's okay to my contention is that rationality is a subset of irrationality, right? And that logic is a subset of language. But by subset, I don't mean a logical subset, as much as I mean it's seemingly included within the medium of being able to have a grammar, right? It's not. It's also a subset. Put it that way, right? So I guess what I'm trying to drive at here is that the idea of being able to have a grammar and speak of one's haptic senses, sense of touch, one's sound, one's ability to speak, one's ability to think and rationalize, right? To think of all of these things and be able to denote them with a grammar is itself a justification of one's presupposition, right? And so innately, just by being able to speak at all, by being able to formulate uh, an identity to my phone, to my speech, to my sound, to our sound, to being able to speak of these things is already inclusive within a grammar of justification. And Floyd had brought up a gentleman, I forget, some doctorate in epistemology, who was speaking about our presuppositions, our assumptions, and these assumptions are network oriented. These are network oriented assumptions. And so the network uh, is found within the grammar. Right? That's the argument. And so the justification is already implicit upon the adoption of language and the grammar being the network, the constituents, the rules of how one uses their syntax and the logos, right? That is already a justification, such that it makes pointing to where one the presupposition goes mute, right? Where the secularist goes mute and says we don't want to, we'll speak of evolution and the history of our physiology in the same manner that they'll speak of their God, right? To me, this is a type of retention. It's a limiting process. Um, it's an inclusion of the historic biological and factual trends and evidences of evolution, but it's a disclusion of certain considerations about consciousness, spirit, the eidetic mental realm, consciousness, what would you call it? Not de jour, not yeah, like carte blanche consciousness without its entanglements into history, as if one could segment themselves off of certain histories. So I think what I'm getting at here is the idea that a posteriori knowledges, meaning the set of experiences that an organism goes through, leads them to a priori knowledges, epistemological, logical frame capabilities, and it's here, it's putting a posteriori prior to a priori knowledges, that is seemingly irrational to the secularist, to this philosophical argument. When the secular rationalist is forced to look at their presuppositional base from which their 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 assumptions sprout, they already employ a grammar, but they're also employing going mute. Don't speak of justification, because hence then the presupposition becomes circular, and then that becomes the double standard relative to arguing that Bible thumpers, by using the Bible to justify their God, is also circular, right? I think the problem with the secular irrationalist is their maintenance of of rationale itself, of trying to maintain rational form. They're afraid of being circular and or contradictory. They're afraid of utilizing the fallacies, as if the fallacies are not actionable grammatical processes in and of themselves, right? They want to make certain that their speech acts, the propositional Aristotelian um, logic, is somehow ordained as sacred, sacrosanct, and maintained, right? So when there is a violation, like dilithiism or a contradiction that's held, they're going to reject that out of hand instead of moving into that, and we're moving into, look, this speech act is not meant to have a propositional truth value, right? So the real crisis, I think, is this, the notion that either side, the theist or the atheist, are somehow coming to a truth, right? That truth itself is an issuey concept. It's not that it's not something that is achievable. It's not something that can't be um, spoke of, brought to, agreed upon. It's not an unsensible thing. But the maintenance of trying to always make certain that one's propositions are latent with truth value, or have an expectation of that, that's problematic. So anyway, I think the secularist rationalist has a problem when they want to go mute and not attempt to use the Speech Act to point to or have an effect on other people's understanding, from which they could conjure, if you will, uh, uh, a justification. Well, I shouldn't say a justification, a speech act that appears to be like a justification for their presuppositions, as opposed to just pointing to a physiological base that brings them there, meaning greater articulation is allowed, right? So I think what's really funny is that people don't think that rationality is somehow uh, not a subset, once again, a subset of irrationality, meaning to speak at all, to be able to utter a word is not necessarily uh, a rational or a logical or a propositional truth function, right? Language, irrational utterances seemingly outline the realm of rational utterances. And from within the rational utterances, then we speak of truth function, right? So I think this is a matter of how this is laid out. And I think it's problematic. I'm putting this out there as a response to a video that MK had posted. And hopefully this will generate some sort of discussion. I'm more than willing to speak with anybody in the community, one-on-one or in groups about this topic. Thanks.